Welcome, everybody. This is Marc, Wealth Advisor and Chief Investment Officer of CAM Investor Solutions. Today, we're joined by a couple of special guests, Tom Breedlove and Carolyn Livingston. They're with HomePay. Tom is the Senior Director for HomePay, and Carolyn is a Senior Manager. And what HomePay is, they're a provider of payroll and tax and concierge support services for a lot of household employment requirements and a lot of related areas. And I thought they'd be a great guest today because there's a lot going on in not just the household employment world, but a lot of planning is going around with a lot of our audience around topics such as education, schools being slow to start or starting in a different way. So I wanted to welcome to our channel today. So welcome, folks.
Thanks, Marc. Thanks for having us.
Good to be here.
Of course. I know, actually, interestingly enough, HomePay is based in Austin, Texas, where I'm actually at today. And Tom's in Austin, but Carolyn's closer to where I normally reside in Colorado up in Crested Butte. So she's got the best backdrop, as you can tell from all of it. But a couple things. Yeah, exactly. So a couple of things I wanted to, we'll jump into some of the current events related, but I think it's really important for our audience just to help them understand how did y'all get started and share a little bit more about HomePay and kind of how it's evolved over the years.
Yeah, be happy to do that. We actually started in the early 90s. My brother, Bill Breedlove, and his wife, Stephanie, had a 1-year-old, and we're in a nanny share with neighbors. And they were executives with big consulting firms near Denver, actually, and in Golden. And when they set up the nanny share, my brother said, we got to make sure we do this right. The payroll system, a lot of people don't realize the payroll system is what provides benefits and protections to employees. So he wanted to take care of the nanny, wanted to make sure that she had Social Security, Medicare, unemployment, disability, all those benefits, and also make sure that they were compliant, didn't get in trouble. And have a wage dispute or something else. So they figured it out. They figured out how to be compliant. They actually talked to a bunch of accountants and advisors in the Denver area, and they couldn't find anyone that really did everything that needed to be done, from payroll to tax filing to labor law to insurance. It's quite a few disciplines all kind of rolled into one, and they couldn't find anybody that did that holistically. So my brother, being very entrepreneurial, said, you know what, I'm going to figure all this out. And they did it for not only the nanny share family that they were working with, but also for a bunch of neighbors. And then first thing they knew, they had about 20 or 30 clients, some in California. So they figured out all the California state law and how that pulled with the federal law. And then about 2 years later, they had 10 states. And next thing you knew, they had built, a really terrific business, helping families take care of all of their compliance issues and really, make life a little easier for busy families. And that's really what we've kind of built the company on, is take all the work and all the worry out of being a household employer. And then in 2012, the company actually was acquired by care.com, which is the world's largest destination for care, and families and caregivers find each other there. And Care said, you know what, we really need HomePay. We need a service like this for our families. So when they do find someone, they've got a real easy way to take care of all the details and logistics. And so it's been a real nice marriage. Once we were acquired by care.com, we actually changed our name from Breedlove and Associates to care.com HomePay, or a lot of people just call us HomePay. And that's our history.
That's fantastic. And we'll get in again to some of them, current events related. But over the year, you've worked with thousands of families. Maybe share some specific examples of exactly what you've done to help people during this current time related, similar to over the past several years of just operating normally.
Yeah, I'd love to take that one. I joined forces with HomePay in 2007, and was just really drawn to the mission of the company, which is to just eliminate all the work and worry and risk for families during the busiest times of their life and make it easier for them to care for all their loved ones. Really mission that hit home for me. Was raised by very busy working parents, and remember seeing them, struggling to balance and juggle everything. So it's really nice to have that personal mission, and navigating child care and also senior care options can be really complicated for families, and lots of different options out there, and there's certainly not any kind of one size fits all best solution. It's very personal, and so we're just really proud at HomePay. And I know, in my 13 years here, we've always had an approach of being very consultative and working alongside advisors to help families gather all the information that they need to make an informed decision. And of course, a big part of that is the financial aspects. And so we have always provided complimentary consultations. So we serve families in all 50 states, and we can cover all of the compliance details that apply to a family's unique situation, kind of just taking into account where they live, because every state is different, and then the job description, and really pull together in about 20 minutes all of the relevant details in it to a real itemized, simple budgeting breakdown that gives them a real complete picture of what they're looking at in terms of, costs, including things like overtime compensation if they're going to have a nanny working 45 hours or over 40 hours. 45 is really common, since most parents work about 40 hours and need a little buffer there. So we can pull together those types of considerations to make sure that they're compliant. And then, of course, some of the added costs like the employer taxes and any necessary insurance. And then some good news with tax breaks that can really help to offset some of the costs. So it's really rewarding to me that we can kind of quickly bring all that information together, because families have so many things they're considering. This is one piece of it. So then, if family does decide that household employment is the right solution, we are here to make that next step of onboarding an employee really seamless and easy for families, and then save them about 50 to 55 hours per year, according to the IRS, on managing that process for their employee, from payroll to tax filings and all that fun paperwork we can take off their plates. So I would say, that's the biggest thing, is to really just help families look at this option, and then, if they decide to proceed, making it an easy next step. And then for families that want to continue outsourcing, we have a really flexible service. It's just a monthly fee for us to manage everything, and they can use it as long as they'd like. So
that's interesting, because I know I've gone through some of that myself with our little one in the last few years, and it continues to change, and it's not easy, and it hasn't been easy. And I sense it's only going to get more interesting going forward. So maybe talk about, Tom or Carolyn, how is not just the early days of Breedlove and Associates or coming together with care.com, but talk about maybe how have you evolved over the years? What have you seen really as big, an evolution for your business? I know there's other providers out there, but just talk about what's happened in the last few years for you all.
Yeah, I mean, we have evolved over the years. I would say the cornerstone of what we've done has been to provide the support that families need. That's one thing that commercial payroll providers are dealing with businesses. Businesses don't need much support. Families, on the other hand, don't do this every day, and they're busy. So, they don't have a back office and accountants and lawyers and everybody to help. So we had to build a team that had all that expertise, that was there to answer the phone and help families through all their little questions and issues in the moment. So that there's no phone tag, and there's no back and forth or potentially making a mistake because they couldn't get a hold of us. So we really, really put a lot of emphasis on support. But then over the last, I'd say 8 to 10 years, we have invested heavily in technology, because we've found that we need to meet our customers where they're doing the work. And a lot of times it's at 11 o'clock at night after they put the kids to bed, and they need to communicate with us or manage something. So we built a proprietary system for household employment, which was a whole new world, a whole new beast that you can't buy off the shelf. So we had to build it. And when we did that, we built a portal that made it extremely easy for families to have full visibility, and their advisors to have full visibility of everything that's going on in the payroll world, all the payroll records, all the tax filings, the accrued tax liabilities. They could have access to, their account, their employees, be able to manage things, be able to report hours, change hours, and try to do all of that through technology, so that it was easier. And if they wanted to call us, we were there for them. But if they don't need to call us and they just want to get something done real quick, the technology has actually allowed us to, serve clients better. So that's probably the biggest evolution we've had. And in my opinion, it's the technology has freed up our consultants to actually provide more value. They're less in the weeds with changing an address or something online, and now they're much more focused on helping people resolve real questions about, how does the labor law work? What about unemployment? What about, COVID sick pay and paid sick leave, and how does that work? And, all the questions that families are having now, we've actually put ourselves in a position to be able to help families through, because we've freed up a lot of resources through technology.
Right. That's interesting. I think, and I'm sure, now, like you said, it's really, really important. Just to draw some comparisons, I think it'd be helpful to understand, what trends were you seeing prior to COVID for childcare? And I think when we get into it in a few minutes, that'll help the audience also understand, or better understand, what might be necessary or available now.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that a little bit. So leading up to the current times, and I would say growing over the last 10 years, we've been seeing a few different trends that are impacting kind of just the way families are approaching childcare. So one big one I would say is the increasing cost and shortage of spots in a lot of cities for center-based childcare options. And then you also see a narrowing of options further caused by traffic in larger cities. So families don't want to go too far from home, or they'll sit in traffic for hours. And so I think it really kind of limits some of the options. And then you combine that with workplace flexibility and remote work options, and then also the ability and I guess willingness of grandparents too to help out with childcare. So we're seeing a lot more families looking for more of kind of a patchwork solution versus, like, when I first started with HomePay, we primarily just saw people that knew they wanted to hire a full-time nanny. That was just, how they always planned to approach childcare. And now we see more, it's actually more common that families are just exploring a lot of different options to piece together the resources they have available and what works with their lifestyle and their work schedules. And so it's a lot more customized. And a few just kind of examples would be a lot more part-time nannies that we're seeing to fill coverage gaps. So, after school nannies is obviously a really big one. And then families are also teaming up more and have been, so that the Breedloves were kind of, as Tom mentioned, they started the business for their own nanny share. And I think they were, kind of innovative there. There weren't a lot of people doing that back in the early 90s, but that's become a lot more common now, where people, especially in certain cities, like it's been common for some time in DC and New York, but it's growing in other cities. And so families are teaming up with neighbors to share a nanny. And so those are some of the trends. And then we're also seeing some growth in corporate sponsored in-home backup care. So just to help meet that model of families patching together, there's obviously going to be a lot more situations where care falls through. And so companies are meeting their employees there with corporate sponsored backup care.
That's interesting. I know we had something similar, and I had no clue what to do, to be frank, through the process. So until after the fact, of course, like a lot of families go through. But what are some of the things I think families need to look out for? Like you mentioned, not just part-time nannies, but especially in a nanny share situation, because that's, like you said, becoming much more common. What
Yeah.
should families be looking out for in those areas?
Yeah, with nanny shares, there's a lot of sort of misperceptions about how they should be handled. Really, when you're sharing a nanny, it's kind of a unique situation where the nanny is working two jobs at the same time. So it can be really a win-win because each family is able to pay, on average, they're paying about 60 or 70% of what they would pay if they employed the nanny on their own. So the nanny is now making more because there's two families paying 60 or 70% of the what they would pay to if it was just their family. And then the families are saving money, and then they also like the social aspect of having another child outside the family in the mix. And so there's a lot of benefits there, but there's also a lot of details that families have to work through, both from just making sure they pair up with a family that has similar needs and approaches, and so a compatible share family, and then from there just structuring it. So we talk with families every day that are doing nanny shares and sort of have a set of items that we need to take them through on splitting the hourly rate. And then we can also, when we do that budgeting assessment that I referred to earlier, it's actually nice because it's almost always good news for families because they come out ahead by their tax breaks basically exceed the cost of the taxes they're paying toward their nannies. So they come out ahead by paying on the books. But just getting all of that set up correctly so that the correct amount of income tax is withheld from the nanny's paychecks. But once it's all set up, it runs really smoothly. And a service like ours can really help with that because, of course, it's pretty common to have like a one-child rate and a two-children rate, and then you have to factor that in when you're thinking about overtime. So we do a lot of support for families and nanny shares to make sure that everything's handled properly and they're not having to wonder how to handle certain situations. So there's just kind of some little logistical details that have to be accounted for when you're looking at sharing with another family that they want to know about. So, and then the other thing, just side note, people will ask sometimes, well, if it's in the other family's home, then could that family be the employer and then I just pay them for letting my child come to their house? And that can be problematic because it creates liability. And so when you kind of think about the one family that's paying the other family, it can create liability for the family that's hosting, and also for the family that is paying the other family. Technically, if they're instructing this nanny as to how to care for their child, they are also a joint employer in this scenario. So while it may seem easier, it can cause problems to have one family do it all and the other family pay. So in the end, just getting it set up so each family is doing it the same way and set up as a household employer, maybe a little bit of time in the beginning, but then it typically creates a lot less headaches down the line than it would for one family to try to take on all of that on their own.
Right. That's interesting because I know, and this may be for a different conversation or a different session, but we've heard something similar with elder care too, with some trends and around household employees. Not to jump off on that tangent, but anything around that's related to the same issues or challenges you're seeing?
Well, you may take that, Carolyn.
Yeah, sure.
Right. Yeah, senior care has really changed quite a bit in the last few years. About 4 years ago or so, there was a repeal of a really important law called the companion care exemption. And what ended up happening was, to kind of go back a half a step, from 1974 until a few years ago, anyone who was providing companionship to an elderly person was not entitled to overtime, and in some cases they weren't even required to be paid a minimum wage in certain states. And so what happened was every home care agency that employed caregivers, they called all those caregivers companions, and they paid them, barely enough to, honestly, to get by. A lot of them were making $8-9 an hour. And that kept their cost of goods down though. And so when they charged the family, they were having to pay the caregiver $8 or $9 an hour, and they charged the family, $18 an hour to cover all their overhead and profit margin and all that. But what happened was, when this law got repealed, they said that now these caregivers have to be paid overtime and minimum wage. And if they're employed by a third party firm, so that means a home care agency, if they employ the caregiver, they have to pay overtime. But if the family is the employer, the family frequently doesn't have to pay overtime. So, you can, as you start to think about the ramifications of that, it becomes pretty profound, because, maybe certain types of cases, it's not a big deal. But if you start to look at the really high hour cases, where you need continuity of care and you need the same caregiver there most of the time, which most of what we see is Alzheimer's and dementia type cognitive decline cases, where they need continuity. They need one caregiver to provide stability and not spook the patient. But if they do that, they would have to pay overtime to the home care agency. So you see the rates now going up to $28, $30, $35 an hour for them to have continuity, which is driving, that whole thing is driving a lot of families, I think, to think about private employment, because if I hire that caregiver myself, I may be able to cut my costs down. And the numbers that Carolyn and I see every day, we run budgets for families, and the numbers that we see, you can save as much as $70,000, $100,000 a year just by switching who the employer is from the home care agency to the family. So that in and of itself has created a gravitational pull, I think, as families are learning about it. It's created a lot of pull toward private employment in general. And now, because of COVID and the concerns about exposure, and that, the nursing homes and the assisted living facilities all being, really hit hard by COVID, a lot of folks are really thinking about that. That's kind of adding more to the trend. And they're thinking, okay, how can I keep mom or dad at home? And how can I minimize the exposure of having a revolving door of caregivers in here? I want one or two people and that's it. Well, that's where private employment can really create more control, more continuity, and save a lot of money. So those are, we could certainly do a whole session on senior care, because there is a lot more to it, but that's kind of the overview.
Okay. And that's good. And I don't want to get too deterred from the little one care, but I think maybe that's a topic we'll come back to in the fall, because you're right. That's an evolving, and it's a growing, and it's a highly important topic, but definitely probably one that deserves a lot more time. So we'll put that on our agenda maybe for the next time, but I appreciate that insight. Before we jump into some of the hot questions I do have for you on today's environment, just give me a quick maybe summary of what are some of the biggest benefits that, someone in our audience might receive from HomePay and what you all do. You've mentioned several things, but if there was a few things that you said, hey, here's some of the big benefits, what would that be?
Well, I think first, right off the top, is combining forces with people like you, Marc. Families really struggle with all the myriad decisions they have to make and the complexities of care. It is a big expense for them. It is an important thing for them. And yet it's often overlooked. And I applaud you as an advisor for being willing to kind of get into the dirty, tough stuff like care, because I know it's not sexy investment stuff. It's hard stuff, but I think advisors, need to help families through this. They're struggling to figure all this stuff out, and working with you, I think we can really help families understand all the options and the cost implications and the work implications of all the options, and really assess, what's going to be the best outcome for them. And, I think that at the end of the day is a huge benefit, that together with you, we can help families make a lot of really tough decisions. If they do decide to hire someone in and around their home and they are an employer, then the biggest benefit I think we give them is peace of mind that that they don't have to worry about anything going wrong. We can help them maximize tax breaks and help them minimize all their risk. Don't worry about workers' comp problems where there's an injury and there's a lawsuit. Don't worry about, you won't have to worry about overtime and wage disputes when you have to let your nanny go and maybe that she's disgruntled and files a claim or of some sort. We want to take care of all those kinds of headaches and hassles so that, you do this professionally and you don't have to worry about a thing. And if you do it right, the tax breaks will offset most of the cost of the incremental cost of being an employer and taking care of things correctly. So once we can run numbers and kind of explain that to people and show them their options, a lot of people feel like it's private employment is a good way to go, and having a specialist, whether it's HomePay or somebody else, having a specialist who can manage all the, like I was saying before, all of the inner workings between payroll, tax questions, labor law questions, insurance questions, and not have to worry about, well, am I asking all the right questions? Am I managing everything correctly? You've got, with a specialist like us, you've got one accountable partner who can manage all of those pieces for you. And that means peace of mind. And that means not having, being able to dedicate your time to your loved one and not to administrative employment stuff. That's our goal, is to get rid of that.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, because as we've seen, not just over the last 5 months when COVID really started, impacting everyone, but even before that, a lot of the planning we did often did require addressing questions about many of these topics. And so it's been great, I think, to work with you all on that. But I think also we've seen it a lot more. I know back in April and May, for example, when COVID was really starting to change the dynamic at home with schools and employment schedules and all the different things that it impacted. This was one of the top questions we started getting, as I think I was sharing with you, Carolyn, recently, about what should we be doing, and knowing that we're not the experts, but you all are. It was great to have you today. So one of the things I'm curious about is upcoming school year. This is top of mind, I think, for anybody who's got 1, 2, 10, it doesn't matter how many kids. If you have a grandchild, everyone's talking about it. Everyone's thinking about it, given so much uncertainty and debate. As it relates to younger children and education, and given the current environment, what trends are you seeing as it relates to, I think, the upcoming school year and schedules and childcare? Maybe talk to that for a few minutes, because I know that's something that everyone's talking about right now.
Yeah, I'll be happy to take that one. I am digging through it myself for my incoming first grader, and he was already switching from his preschool Montessori into a public school environment, and now we have this added layer. So one thing I think that's very clear to me between my, looking at my personal journey through this process and then working with our clients is everyone's situation is unique, and the situation in different cities and states is all unique. So I think the one thing that feels consistent across all of that is just what you just said, Marc, just the uncertainty of it all, that it's constantly changing. There's often conflicting ordinances and guidelines and requirements, and the schools are trying to navigate all that and keep the families up to date, but it's just this moving target. Makes it really hard to keep up with and plan for, obviously. Kind of get a plan in place and then it all changes. So I know we've heard a lot of different things on scheduling from the schools. There's the block scheduling, the alternating weeks, the delayed starts, combination approaches. I know our school has just announced a high blend, so it's like it's like a combination approach. So a lot of changes, but I think what families seem to be really looking for now, after getting a taste of the remote learning in the spring and some of the same uncertainty of whether school buildings were going to reopen or not, is they're really just looking at different options to try to create some predictable routine, some consistency. You know, I know everyone that's a parent can say that that's really important for kids, especially young kids. And I think it's important for all of us to have some sort of predictability and routine, but especially for kids. So a lot of families are really just looking for anything they can grasp onto to help fill that gap, create some sort of as much of a normal sense for their kids as possible, and for themselves, right? I mean, especially, you know, working parents, we have our own schedules that we're juggling, so we're trying to have a plan that we can rely on and plan around. So that would be the sort of the main thing that it seems like families are really looking toward. And of course, with the push toward limiting exposure and limiting the number of people that we are around, and the schools trying to navigate options around that too. People are, you know, it's creating this gravitational pull toward in-home, you know, smaller group settings. So I think that
That's interesting. I mean, I think then that's definitely, again, like you, I'm in the middle of that myself, my wife and I. What about as the kids get a little bit older, right, with high schools, kids coming home from college, not knowing what to do? Anything there that you're seeing or hearing with your clients? Because that adds, I'm sure, an extra element of consideration and complication to the equation.
Yeah, that's a really, there's a whole other set of considerations there. You know, we don't see it as much at HomePay. The main thing that we're hearing on from older kids, especially college graduates, recent college graduates, and even students that have extra time in their schedule is, you know, they're a great asset or a great tool for these parents looking to fill care gaps. So a lot of, especially education majors, but across the board, you know, a lot of families, what they need is just someone to keep their kids on track if they're doing virtual learning or remote learning through their schools. And so it's really kind of a facilitator role, kind of a blended nanny / tutor role. And if they're using their school's curriculum, they don't necessarily need a teacher, but they need someone that can really keep their kids engaged and keep them on track. And so I have heard a lot of families talking about, you know, going to their local university and recruiting through that avenue. But yeah, the whole college challenges, that's a whole other area. I wouldn't say that we really see a lot of, but I can say a lot of families that we interact with are looking toward those college students and recent graduates to see if they can hire them part-time to fill in some of their care gaps.
That's interesting also because I know it sounds like parents are adapting. I've heard some interesting and exciting, I think, things too through this. Not that anybody wants to be in this environment, but I'm hearing stories about different ways that parents are innovating, like leveraging some of the technologies that are available to them. There are obviously some of the things you guys do, but a lot of things out there. Maybe share some of those stories, because I think that's really important for the audience to hear, is how parents are innovating, because I think people will want to hear some of those things that are going on out there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it piggybacks nicely off of the parents are really trying to piece together all the resources they have. And there's a lot of new online educational content being pumped out, that a lot of really good stuff out there. I think that's a whole other area that families are, you know, there's so many new things to navigate, but that's one of them. You know, with Zoom and different engagement tools out there, you know, there were a lot of virtual summer camps, and I've heard a lot about Zoom play dates and kids. I mean, I've even heard like kids getting together for a daily Zoom dance party, you know, just something to keep them seeing other kids on the screen. That's been popular. I actually, myself personally, use Zoom quite a bit this summer for my kids. We have a nanny share, and the other little boy in the share was gone for the summer, but he would Zoom in, and it worked pretty well. We have kind of like we put it together last spring, and it's worked really well, but it's basically a preschool pod. And so we have a nanny / preschool teacher that does a lot of stuff, and she was able to actually bridge that with a 3.5-year-old. My younger son's 3.5, and so this little boy in the share would Zoom in every day, and he could see, you know, she'd be in our little living room area and doing the activities. So that was really neat to see, and it kept them connected. And we're actually doing it. We're out of town on vacation now in Colorado, and we're zooming in back to Austin to just kind of keep them connected. So that's pretty cool, all that kind of stuff. And the kids are really, they're growing up in all of this, and so they're learning how to engage through Zoom, like we're all kind of learning as adults to do in our jobs. So it's pretty cool to kind of see them. And they see us doing it. I know my kids think it's fun to Zoom because they see me doing it all the time. So they feel like they're, they're kind of doing big adult stuff.
That's great to hear that people are finding new ways to connect and keep kids moving along to some pace, right, with their friends or people that they know. And that leads me to kind of something that I know has been a hot topic, and you all have been working on to help a lot of your families. You mentioned to me. Because again, I think kids right now and youngsters are trying to not even so much maybe achieve learning. So I think as parents, we just want to have our kid maybe be normal kids and be engaged with other kids. Yeah. I know our little one brought home a makeshift laptop and cell phone out of construction paper recently and started talking about she had to go do work because I didn't know where she got that from. And I was a little bit sad at first, but also like, well, at least they're learning something through this, but they definitely need to be kids. So maybe talk to me about this whole notion of pods and micro schools, because I know it's been a hot topic in a lot of areas around the country.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it started with the quarantine bubbles. So families realized that they got, they needed some interaction with people outside of their immediate family unit. So there was the big trend toward expanding quarantine bubbles and bubbling up with another family with kids around the same age. And the idea there is just, having one family that's a family you want to hang out with quite a bit since you're not seeing everybody. So I think that trend developed and people started forming their little quarantine circles. And then we've kind of seen that evolve as families look at creative solutions for the school year. And I think one of the main drawbacks that we hear with some of the virtual and remote engagement and learning is just there's something that you can't replace with the in-person interaction, especially when you're talking about young kids. We hear it the most with families with kids entering kindergarten or first grade. I mean, it affects every grade, but especially at those younger grades, it can be a lot harder for them to get the interpersonal development through without having the in-person interaction. So we are seeing a lot of people doing nanny shares, and it's a nanny share, but kind of expanding upon that concept or mashing together the concepts of a nanny share and a quarantine pod to create these little small groups of kids that for a lot, especially working families, but a lot of families looking to share a nanny, and it's even traditionally nanny shares have been the most common we would see. It's for an infant, 2 families, 2 infants, that's but people are kind of expanding out from there, and just it's a little messier when you're talking about older kids because they have a little bit of there's more considerations to think about than just with infants, but yeah, they're making it work, and they're saying, look, we did this quarantine bubble, and now as we go into the school year, we're going to look to maybe hire that college kid to come in and support the virtual learning so we can do our own jobs. And so they're kind of trying to piece that together with neighborhood kids, and we're seeing it across all grades, even into the high school. So you asked about high school earlier. We are even seeing high school pods developing where they might not necessarily need someone to do the oversight, but they are bringing in some tutoring support to help with that. So a lot of different creative solutions to bridge that gap that we're seeing with the virtual learning environment.
No, that's great to hear. I mean, and none of us are experts, obviously, in the healthcare field, but with COVID-19, a lot of uncertainty. We don't know how long or short, everything's going to go on. But if you had to say there was 1 or 2 things that parents of young children or folks who maybe have these pods or household employees with nanny shares, what are 1 or 2 things that parents should keep in mind, right now, given the environment?
That's a good question. I would say, I guess this is me personally, but just letting go of having to have, everything planned out to the T, and just sort of pulling on the village that's around people, and looking for ways to, make their lives work, and realizing that it is, gosh, I guess we expect that this is short term, and so it's really just kind of a bridge to get through all of this and come out on the other side without having sacrificed too much in the near term. I think for a lot of the people we talked with, and I know this hits home for me, is, most people that have young kids are at the height of their career, and they're not really looking to step out, and but they're being pulled really, really hard to kind of help. There's just a lot more demands at home with some of the, or most of the different education and enrichment programs, from schools to camps to after school activities, being limited right now. So I think what I'm seeing families doing, and what I think, it seems like is it real important, is just making the most of a really tough situation, and doing what it takes to get through it. That's not easy, right? There's a lot of different factors that come in, and that's where I think, I'm sure that's why you're seeing, Marc, a lot of people coming to you to help with planning, because it's just such a hard thing to plan around with all the, I'm not an investor, but I would imagine, there's always uncertainty with investing. So it's a similar type thing here, so much uncertainty around what's going to happen. So it's looking at those trade-offs of, if you spring for the nanny, that's maybe not an expense that was in the budget. I know it wasn't for us. We thought we'd get through preschool, and then we live in a good public school district that, we did intentionally with the idea we wouldn't have to, pay private school tuition, but kind of reassessing that plan and looking at what does that mean short term, and is it a trade-off that we want to make, and that way, once you kind of think it through and just make a decision that looks at all the different angles, it makes it easier to, I think, move forward with a plan. So.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think there's so much uncertainty, as we all know, and there's a lot of kind of, we call it risk management in what we do. It's kind of knowing what we can control and can't control often, and there's a lot of things we can't control right now. So I think last question for both of you is really, you've given a lot of great information to the audience today. I'm just curious, because we always tell folks, look, what we know today, here's what we recommend with planning and investing in a lot of areas. With what you know today, if you had to talk to, your clients or any of this audience that's watching this, what would you be telling them that they should be doing today? What are the opportunities that they can be taking advantage of with what's available today in regards to, planning around, household employees, taxes, all these things that are obviously evolving as well as we speak?
You want me to take that, Carolyn?
Well, yeah, I think we could maybe both try to provide insight there. I think it's hard. There is just so much uncertainty, and there's not one right path for families. But what I would say is there is definitely a lot of I guess they say necessity is the mother of invention, and all of these things are very important, from health and wellness to education to these are all the different changes, that the different things COVID is affecting are all really important topics for people. And so it seems like just really exploring the options that are out there, even though it is overwhelming, because there are a lot of different options now, more than there were before, and you're having people having to change plans. That's never fun. I know most people plan far in advance for how they're going to handle education and childcare, and so having to have those plans have a huge wrench in them, and having to suddenly pivot is really tough. But I would say, for me, just being able to lean on people that have helpful, disciplined ways of assessing options, so that you can, I know for me, I have to really balance out the kind of the emotional side of things that you have as a parent. And there's a lot of fear circulating right now, and really just kind of rechannel that into productive ways to try to band together with communities and family, and look at the resources available and how you can best apply those options and resources to your unique situation. And so that's where I think we have a small piece of that with people looking at private hires of hiring employees and wanting to do it right and wanting to know what that means. As I mentioned earlier in our discussion, we've been doing that for going on 30 years. So we kind of have it really worked out down to, at least we can make that financial side and kind of looking at that option a little easier. So, use services like ours, and lean on your advisors. I mean, I think everybody has to lean on each other right now. Across the board. I mean, just in all aspects of life, we all have to really pull on every resource and tool that we have available to us. That's what I would say.
That's a really good answer. Yeah, I feel the same way you do, Carolyn. I mean, when there's chaos, discipline is king, and I think the ability to explore and have option B, C, D, and E, remain flexible, embrace the uncertainty as part of life and part of the experience, but plan for all the contingencies and have a good information, good resources from smart, talented people like Marc and team, and get the options on the table, assess them, be flexible, and ride the put the emotions aside to a certain degree, and go with your, make sure your brain is not getting overridden by your heart. The kids are very resilient, very adaptive. So we as parents, it's stressful. We all, I think one of the things we have always felt is that parents are under enormous stress to balance work and parenthood, even under the best of times. So we totally empathize with the stress and the anxiety. And I think, though, all we can really do is be adaptive and be flexible, have our options laid out. And that's where we certainly can try to support Marc and help you. And we will all get through it, and we'll all be better for it. So, our hats are off to all parents right now.
Yeah. Thanks. That's a great answers, both of you. And I appreciate both of your time. Tom Breedlove, Carolyn Livingston with care.com HomePay. Thanks so much for your time today. This has been great. I'm sure we'll have to do this again in a few months, because not just on the elder care topic, which obviously is its own topic in itself, but by then we might also have a little bit of an insight to what the rest of the world with school starts and stops, or hopefully, hope for the best, will look like. So thanks again for your time. I appreciate it, everyone watching today, and we'll talk to you all soon.
Thank you, Marc.
Oh, thanks, Marc.
Thank you.